The Handless Maiden. There once was a miller who lived with his wife and daughter along a great river. The small town was very prosperous and brought all of their goods to the miller in order for him to turn it into their goods. And the miller and his wife lived very happily. But one day, as rivers always do, they dried up. And the miller's wheel stopped spinning, and the entire town and area fell on very hard times. And on the day that our story begins, the miller was out about a mile away from home, where he was scratching a living, eyes cast downward, searching for kindling, perhaps a morsel of food to bring back to his family. And he hadn't noticed that his wanderings upon the forest edge had caught the attention of a small, short, pale man with a wide-brimmed hat. And as the miller was wandering past, the short man, face half covered from his hat, "Miller! Miller, 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 how sad it is to see you in such dire straits. For I remember when you used to prosper. I remember the parties you threw and the people you helped. I can only imagine how you must feel about it, but it pains me so to see you in such straits." "Well," says the miller, quite surprised and taken aback, I don't quite know what to say." "Well, let me help you," says the man. "I am a fellow of the wood, and I have powerful, powerful magic. And I shall give to you endless wealth." "Well, yeah, that would be a wonderful gift, but I mean, I would love such a thing, but surely you must want something in return." "Well, I suppose simply for the etiquette of the thing. Let's say I shall take everything that is behind your hovel at this very moment." And so the miller thought to himself, and all he could think of was the old apple tree out behind the house. And so, very hurriedly, he agreed to the deal. And instantaneously, the little man, cackling to himself, barely able to contain his excitement. Good. Well, I shall come around next Thursday. And I shall give you these couple of days to think about the deal that you have struck and just whom you have struck it with." And with that, the man with the wide-brimmed hat scampered back off into the forest. And the miller, excited that fortunes may have yet been reversed, began to hurry home. And indeed, already the wealth and affluence was raining down upon his house. And as he got close to his mill, he could see already the broken shingles repaired, the wheel was spinning, the water in the river had already risen, aromas of sweet meats and candy cakes are cooking in the oven. And his wife comes running out to him. My, what has happened? There's strings of onions and garlic and ham hocks hanging from the ceiling, and a brand new waistcoat, and oh, look at this new dress that I have. Where did it all come from? Oh, details. Where is our daughter? I want to share it with her. My husband. How could you even ask such a thing? She's where she always is. Out behind the house. Under the apple tree. Swishing back and forth like she always does. Well, it was at that moment the miller realized just what the deal was that he had struck, and just whom it was that he had struck it with. Well, the daughter took the news quite soberly, almost as if she had expected it. She never was quite comfortable when the wealth came appearing out of nowhere. And so it was, when the Thursday came, she prepared herself, dressed in a nice white linen frock. She wandered down near the forest's edge and drew around herself a white chalk circle. And there she stood, waiting, watching as the little pale man in the big rimmed hat comes tramping down out of the forest, barely able to contain his excitement. Miller, good to see you. I see that you have kept your side of the bargain. And he hurries up to the young maiden. The strangest thing, he could not get beyond the chalk circle. And try as he might, throwing himself upon the circle, rebounding back, thrown back, and after a short time he became very, very angry. Miller, this was not the deal at all. No. She is too clean. I want the filth of the world upon her. You must forbade her to bathe. I want the smear of this earth upon her. She must stink. I shall return within a week. Have her prepared for me. And with that, the little man wandered back up into the forest. Well, the miller and his wife, with the implied threat of the end of the wealth if the deal was not met, for the next week forbade the maiden from washing. They wove sticks and twigs into her hair. They smeared mud upon her, forced her to roll within the pig's pen. And when the week came, she found that her chalk had been taken from her. But still she wandered down to where it was she stood the last time. And this time, as the little man came scampering down out of the forest, she began to weep. Not tears of fear, but true, deep grief. The kind of grief that you and I may only experience once or twice in a lifetime. True amniotic fluid, sea salt. The healing tears of prayer, circling down around her body as she wipes her cheek. The cleanliness spread across her body, wiping away the filth. And the little man turns to the miller. She's not depressed. She's grieving. I wanted the smear of the world on her. Miller. This was not the deal at all. No, it's her hands. Her hands that wipe her clean. Get rid of them. Take a silver axe and cut off her hands. If you don't, not only will the wealth end, but I shall bring a killing blight to the village and your name will be ruined. And with that, the man disappeared once again into the forest. The miller and his wife, beside themselves, not knowing what to do, way, way in over their heads. The maiden looked to her father and says, "You were my gatekeeper. You let the wolf in. Do it." And so the silver axe was gathered. And with all his might, the miller brought the axe down. Well, a week later, once again, the man comes bounding out of the forest, and she's standing in the same spot as before. And again, she begins to weep, tears streaming down her cheeks, and this time, the tears themselves taking on a life of their own, swirling around her, washing her clean. And again, the little man with the wide-brimmed hat could not touch her and could not get to her. Well, even the fellows of the wood know that after 3 attempts, that's pretty much it. You just kind of give up on a thing. And so he left. The strangest thing is that the wealth continued. The deal did not break. But perhaps the worst consequence of all, the daughter could not stand the hypocrisy of it anymore. And one night, she leaves a note behind as she wanders out away from the miller's cottage, heading out into the dark forest, not knowing where else to go. And the note again said, "You were my gatekeeper. You let in the wolf." Now, when a story says that someone wanders in the woods for 4 days, that could be 4 months or 4 years. And wander she did. And this was not a cheery wood, no campfires or sing-songs. No, this was a dark place. And much like her father in the beginning, she had to scratch a living, eyes downcast, searching for kindling. And it's hard to hunt when you have no hands. Sometimes a little bird would leave a morsel of food for her. Streams, brackish, pools, stagnant, drinking water only to be found in small sips, hollowed in the little nooks of boulders. Trunks of trees and tree branches were like prison bars as she wandered through the woods. And after so long a time of wandering, so transformed and bent over she was, one couldn't tell if she was still a woman, a spirit of the forest, or a wolf. But as it is, the wandering did at last come to an end. Quite suddenly and abruptly, she found herself at the edge of the forest. One night, the moon was full, silver light streaming down, and there across the field was a great bright castle with beautiful orchards surrounded by a moat. And oh, the fruit of those orchards, the apples and the pears, ripe, delicious, so she desired that fruit. And yet, even though so many times she had dreamed and longed to leave the forest, she hesitated. But gathering her courage, she went forth. And it is said that night, the moat parted as if a Red Sea moment, inviting her into the orchard and reaching up with the stumps of her hands, clasping a pear and bringing it to her mouth. Oh, delicious was that moment for her. But quickly she became wary again and scampered back up into the woodline. But her presence did not go unnoticed, for the gardener and the one who caretakes of the orchards was out there gardening by moonlight, as often he did instead of by day, and had watched this strange woman come and go. Well, the next morning he went to the king, and while out walking in the orchards, for the king, like many monarchs of the day, were wont to count their fruit. And so as the king was out there counting his fruit and realized that one was missing, the gardener realized that this was his day of triumph and could tell the tale of this strange woman who had come by night and tasted of his fruit. And the king, being a young lad who enjoyed a good story, was very intrigued and decided that night that he and the gardener would wait and watch and see if she would return. And return she did. And as she was again pulling down a piece of fruit, the king warily approached her, and seeing her tangled, gnarled hair sweeping down around her all the way to her ankles, her bent form, circling crows and wolfish stance, he asks of her, "Are you a woman? A spirit of the forest? Or a wolf?" Turning around, thinking to herself, answering hesitantly, "I'm not sure. It's been so long. I don't quite know anymore." Now that is the response of one who has been through the growth of a forest. Well, the king, it is said, fell in love with her despite the circling crows, the wolfish stance, and the gnarled hair. But I tell you, it was because of the wolfish stance and the circling crows and the gnarled hair. And he invited her in to stay at the castle. And it will not surprise you to know that every day the king visited this young lady, bringing her fruit cakes, and sometimes accompanied by musicians, and even tried his hand at poetry a time or two of varying quality. But there came a day when our love-struck king would make his grand gesture, and kneeling down beside her underneath one of the apple trees, he says, "Your voice is like an old song of the riverways. There are songbirds in your bright braided tresses. Your eyes are like diamonds, sparkling with starlight." And he professed his love for her. And not long after that, they were married. And as a wedding gift, he gave to her the only thing she clearly did not have, a pair of very finely crafted silver hands. The maiden, she wore them every now and then. She could feel the king's good intent, but never quite felt comfortable with them. But it was not so long a time before she felt strange, different, swollen, assaulted, blessed. She was pregnant. And she would walk with the king through the orchards, giggling, trying out baby names, and oh, the bliss was great. What a vile wrench it was when the king was called to war. Being a young king, it was his first time. And even though he had much fear, he knew he had to lead from the front and prove to his people he was a king that was worthy of his kingdom. And so it was that he went off to war. But he left very strict instructions that should his wife give birth while he was gone, that the speediest rider would be sent out to let him know of the day of the birth of his son. And so it was the two would be separated for a time, given to very different purposes as she grew life and creation within her, and he went off to destroy life. Well, it was not long then thereafter that she did give birth to a beautiful, beautiful baby boy. And a speedy rider was sent out to find the king on the battlefront. But as the rider was going through the forest, a strange, sleepy spell fell over him, and he stopped for a nap beneath an old oak tree. And a small, pale figure with a wide-brimmed hat snuck up upon him. Whispering into his ear, he says, "When you reach the king, you shall tell him that his wife has given birth to not a child, but a dog. And that is what you get when you marry a woman of the forest." Well, when the speedy rider woke up and finished the journey and found the king upon the battlefront, there he informed the king that his wife had given birth to a dog. The king, thinking to himself that whatever son my wife has blessed me with shall be loved. And after a nice warm meal and a glass of wine, the king says to the rider, "Go and tell my wife that I look forward to being reunited with her soon, and that whatever has befallen our child will be loved and shall always have a place." And the speedy rider headed back to the castle, thinking to himself how lucky he was to have such a progressive king. But again, as passing through the forest, the sleepiness came over him, and again beneath the old oak tree he falls asleep. And the pale man with the wide-brimmed hat says to him, "When you reach the castle, you should tell the queen that the king is appalled that the child has been born, and that upon his return, the heart and tongue of the child and his wife shall be delivered to him upon a plate." Well, the little man scurried off into the forest, and the speedy rider headed off to the castle and brought this news to the queen, the stepmother of our maiden, who immediately upon hearing such things, no, clearly my son has gone mad with the violence of war. But it is clear that my stepdaughter and grandchild are not safe here in the castle. And so she goes to the maiden and tells her that her and her son must go again into the forest. Trembling in fear, the maiden steels herself to the journey, but the stepmother lets her know that not to fear the forest, for it is never the same the second time around. It is always different. You will see. And so that night, covering herself in a cloak with a hooded robe half over her face, holding her baby to her breast, she sneaks from the castle, wandering again into the forest. But it was different this time. There was light, and there were flowers upon the roadway, and within the very first day, blue smoke was seen rising from a hut not far off into the woods. And as she came to the hut, there lived a group of wood sisters, women of the woods who thrived. And the energy of a place like this, healing power of this place was amazing. Drawn to the window, peeking in, watching the women living and caring for each other. Of course, they spotted her before she ever crossed the porch and invited her in to join them. And her and the baby were there. And the strangest thing began to happen. She began to grow her hands back. Now, I do say she often did look off into the distance at sunset, wondering what had befallen her husband, who, upon his return from war, came into the throne room and immediately horrified when presented with a plate of a heart and a tongue, that of a doe. Well, the stepmother immediately understood that some subterfuge had happened between the riding. And she says to her son, "Well, your wife and child have gone off into the forest. And at first I thought perhaps it was for their safety, but now I begin to wonder if it is not for you that they had to go. For I have always wondered at the imbalance of forest knowledge between you and your wife, and that it is not now time for your great wandering within the woods." Immediately turned to heel. The king was out of his throne room, out of his castle, right back upon his horse, riding off into the wilderness to find his love. Now, the forest was dark for him. Tempests and storms, sleet, rain, snow. Branches whipping, tearing, scratching. Food hard to come by. And 1 year turned into 2, turned into 3. And 7 long years he wandered there within the woods. But still, long after many a people would have given up the search, he still continued to search for his wife and child. And search he did. But there comes a day, when blue smoke is seen rising from a lighter, airier corner of the woodland. And as he wanders up to the porch of the hut, he finds there dwelling the Wood Brothers. Stout woodsmen. And they invite him in to cigars and fresh beer. Paradise comes in many forms. Greatly relieved to find rest and respite from the forest. And of course, his first question was, "Have you seen a woman and child around?" "Oh, yes. They are living with our wood sisters just across the hill. We will send word to them." And so word was sent. And within a couple of days, a great celebration was prepared. And the Wood Brothers all gussied themselves up and bolstered themselves up in preparation to be in the presence of their wood sisters. And the wood sisters got themselves all dressed up and fancied up. And they brought the two together. And for a moment a veil was held between the two of them by the oldest wood brother and the oldest wood sister. And when it was dropped, for just a moment, they saw each other as God sees them. Truly and purely into their souls and the depth of their spirit. A moment such as this is enough to carry them on through a lifetime of trials and tribulations of marriage. And they were wedded again that day in a truer sense, And the king, looking down at his wife's hands, marveling at this, she said, "There will be time enough for that later, but look here." And he looks down to see already his 8-year-old son clinging to his leg, reaching a hand down, ruffling his hair. And the two of them returned to the castle, and they lived happily for just so long a time as was appropriate. And so it was that we come to know this story because their son became a storyteller and wandered across the land telling the tale to the next and to the next and to the next until at last here I am today telling it to you.